I now have the distinct pleasure of introducing our two panelists for our last talk. First, Donato Capitella. Donato is a principal consultant at Reversec, where he's part of the Strategic Initiative Enablement team. He first immersed himself in Linux as a teenager and trained as a software engineer, but soon discovered that offensive security offered the variety and depth he craved. At Reversec, our cybersecurity firm born of the merger of MWR Info Security, F-Secure, and WithSecure, as well as others, Donato applies his software engineering roots to red teaming, threat modeling, and network security testing, guiding organizations to build resilient defenses against today's evolving threat landscape. As an authority on generative AI security, Donato leads Reversec's research into LLM vulnerabilities from prompt injection to overly permissive tool investigations. He spearheaded the creation of Spiky, an open source prompt injection testing toolkit now in its 0.02 release and actively used by Reversec consultants to benchmark and harden AI applications. Joining Donato is Praveen Nalasamy. Praveen is the head of product security at BlackRock, a role he's held since July of 2019. In this capacity, he oversees the firm's internal adversarial testing, operations, and drives product security initiatives across BlackRock's digital platforms. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Richard.
So I think we're going to start with a quick context setting, talking about rapid enterprise adoption of Gen AI technologies. Would you like to give a quick introduction about how you have accomplished that at BlackRock as a pair?
Oh, I think that is quite interesting. I think I want to unpack one side of it, which is, when you say rapid adoption, what comes to mind for me is that this is quite different than things like cloud. When we've all gone through the implementation of cloud in our organizations, and there used to be a lot of resistance. You wouldn't get typically like C-level coming back and say, oh, we need to implement cloud now by next month, everything needs to be on the cloud. Actually, organizations were quite risk adverse and they wanted data to stay on premise. I think with Gen AI, I have seen the opposite. I have seen a lot of push from non-technical people that have been used ChatGPT, saw the potential, and now they ask the technical teams to go and implement Gen AI everywhere, which I think, there are some good uses and some uses which are questionable. So that's what I have seen. But what do you feel about that?
So I think that's a very apt comparison versus the intentions of cloud adoption. The acceleration of cloud adoption is Gen AI adoption, because Gen AI came up with a very set of unique risks, irreversible unique risks that maybe cloud didn't necessarily present. I think that's a very fair question. I think in my experience, and BlackRock's journey into Gen AI is right now around like 18 months. Our first product launch was in December 23, that was our first Gen AI product launch. Since then, we have launched a few tens of products for customers. We set on an early framework, which has been somewhat a guiding post on how we want to navigate, where we could find a fine balance between we want to do things faster and sooner, while fully aware of some of these irreversible Gen AI risks that comes in. I use the word irreversible very distinctly here because there are some mistakes that you could make that you can't, once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back. And as part of the framework, the main North Star, I would say, has been what we call as a walled garden, where whether you use a model or data stays within our premises, irrespective of whether it's a self-hosted environment or is it in a subscription in Azure, irrespective of that, we defined a concept of walled garden, where any data or model stays within our controls. That has been a critical guiding point through this entire journey. And we use the word walled garden just mostly because people at all levels understand what that metaphor would look like.
Yeah, and that's something I've seen. I mean, we work with quite a few clients which are on a completely different part of that journey of adopting Gen AI. I think what I enjoy about working with you guys is that there is one part of what people can experiment with in that kind of walled garden. You're basically everything that could potentially be done, somebody's experimenting and trying to figure out that this actually work. And so there is a lot of that boundary pushing and a lot of the experimentation, which makes it very interesting for cybersecurity folks to take a look.
Yeah, and I think as part of this journey, there are two broad use cases that we have. One is AI as consumers, and then AI as producers. AI as consumers is in we are introducing a Gen AI product, new Gen AI product, or an existing Gen AI product, with Gen AI capabilities for internal productivity enhancements. Think of like your easiest example would be your Microsoft 365 copilots, off the shelf assets or customizable off the shelf products. And then there is as producers, which is more heavily focused on engineering teams building custom products for our customers. And I think as part of this walled garden journey, we made this distinction of can we have a safe ground, an isolated safe ground where you could experiment ideas before, and then there is a pathway or framework where you evaluate. Let's say after experimentation, you think there is a viable product here. There is a framework on how we evaluate risks. And then during this risk evaluation process, sometimes this is like a terrible idea. We shouldn't even do this. Just drop this and go home. And this is product. Okay, there are some risks here, but I think we can build guardrails around it, and we can manage these risks. So there's a careful evaluation of this process, of these use cases, before we start building things.
So you mentioned that this journey started in December of 2023. Can you describe how your view of Gen AI security has changed from then through now based on the work that you've been doing in the past few years?
Sure. I think maybe the way I look at this question is, as part of your maturity journey, when you were on a scale of 0 on a 10, like your day one, what was your set of challenges versus when you're at a later stage maturity, what kind of problems? I think day 0 or beginning of the journey was more around understanding the kind of risks that we are signing up for, because relatively this being a new field, the kind of use cases, the products that we're building for our customers, what are the risks that come, and just understanding what risks comes in, and then do we have the ability to build the right guardrails for those risks? I think that was probably, I would say, my focus maybe like 18 months back or 15 months back. Today, the focus is more around, now that we have a reasonably mature process on evaluating use cases, putting and setting up the right guardrails. It's more around like scaling up. On average, we do evaluate like a couple of tens of cases a month across all teams. That's scaling up. And then the second challenge would be more around keeping up with the newer features of what Gen AI provides. For example, like agentic. That's been, for example, agentic use cases has been probably, I would say, the top of the things that keeps me up, like in 25. That was not necessarily the case in 24. So who knows, 26, we may have a new set of things to worry about. So keeping up, so I think those two, I would say, are the differences between what I was thinking about like in 24 versus what I'm thinking about 25.
So you mentioned guardrails a couple of times. Can we talk a little bit about the role of guardrails in LLM applications? And
I'm gonna say something. You made me think of something. We're scared of agentic because they're gonna take your job. No, but like so your journey from day zero to now, you started focusing obviously in building different a different understanding. For me, I think if I look at what we were doing 2 years ago versus what maybe we're doing now, and we had conversations at the very beginning when we started working together on this, I was very adamant that certain things were not cybersecurity risks. I know that you and I had a lot of back and forth, and typically, because I think there are two buckets. There is a safety bucket, how to make a bomb or how to cook crystal meth. Okay, we don't want LLMs to tell, but that's a legitimate thing in LLM red teaming, right? I'm not making this up. But then we are cybersecurity people, right? So we are used to completely different things. We're used to, okay, some customer data is going to get leaked, or some money is going to, so there is going to be an impact. And I wasn't seeing a lot of that impact at the beginning. And so I think some of the use cases for Gen AI, some of the conversational use cases can feel quite limited if you compare them to the traditional cybersecurity risks that we find. And so a lot of it is very reputational, if that's the right word. So if this happens, but I think the way that my thinking has changed is that now I'm seeing a little bit more of those reputational. I'm amenable to helping people, to report one of those and maybe not report it as a very low risk informational issue where I see that something is exposed on the internet. And I think it was, with you and some of the other clients, part of that journey to see, okay, we cannot steal customer data, but maybe this is still an issue reputational. I don't know if your thinking has changed with regards to that, or how do you see that?
I think there was a little bit of rewiring for me personally as a security practitioner from day zero to like 18 months later. And there are certain topics which I probably take a little more seriously now than before. Good examples are these kind of I use the word reputational risk, I call as a broader business risks. So you build a Copilot chatbot, and then that tells you found a way to show some harmful content, whether it's to make a bomb or say nasty things about your organization, which you could screenshot and then have a reputational impact, right? So this is large sort of business risk, or maybe like hallucination. I think it took me a little bit of time to take hallucination a little more seriously in the context of business context. So I see the broad bucket of business risks, and then there is a traditional cybersecurity risk in the context of like the prompt injection, jailbreaking, PIA leakage, etc. Right. So both are topics I try to evaluate. Now, the risks themselves may be different in each product that you're building. For example, if it's just a document, if you build a product that takes a document, processes, and then annotates it, and then generates a certain output, probably but these risks are relatively lower versus a chatbot that's open to like a large number of untrusted users or semi-trusted users, where these business risks are much more elevated. So, to your comment, there is the traditional cybersecurity risk, and there is a business risk that you would need to evaluate on the product that you're building.
And I really like that you said rewiring. I think that kind of describes also what's happened to me when looking at those risks. I still think that the cybersecurity risks are much worse than some would be how to make a bomb type of risk. But yeah, rewiring is the word that I think best describes how I'm coming to look at these things. What was the other question, Rich? I obviously gonna hijack this anyway.
That's okay. I was asking Praveen and you about guardrails. So Praveen had mentioned several times about LLM and application development and guardrails, and I think that it might be interesting to understand how you ensure that these guardrails are in place when you have such a large organization. You can't necessarily have eyes and hands on every single piece of moving infrastructure.
I can give maybe a builder's perspective on this topic, and you can maybe give me a breaker's perspective. That is this top. So when it comes to guardrails, there are three questions I look at: the what, where, the how. The what would be what kind of guardrails you want to build. Okay, is it a set of input guardrails or output guardrails? Like, what are the type of guardrails? Input guardrails could be you want to validate the user input in a chatbot, or an output guardrail with it that checks for things like markup or images that's being generated by the LLMs. So that's the kind of the what type of guardrails you think is relevant for the risk for the product that you're building. Then the question comes to, okay, where do you want to build these guardrails? Do you want to build it in the product that you're building, or do you want to have like a centralized middleware where you could build these guardrails? Because let's say your organization is going to build 20 different products. You want to have like 20 different instances of these guardrails being built, or you could have like a central middleware platform where these guardrails could be built. And then the third question is like how you want to build the guardrails. You could leverage some of most providers have a basic level of these guardrails that you could leverage, like whether it's OpenAI, Azure, they have a minimum set of guardrails that they could offer that you could leverage. Then you as an organization could build your own guardrails, or you could also buy some commercial tools. And there's some pros and cons to both approaches. So that's kind of for me as a builder's or defender's view of when it comes to the topic of guardrails. I don't know. You may have a breaker's perspective.
Well, I don't know how much time we've got left because
I think we'd all be interested to hear about how you break the guardrails.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think this is another area where my thinking will have changed, and you will have heard me say this. But I think at jailbreaking or prompt injection much more as password cracking. So for me, or password guessing. For me, that's the best cybersecurity analogy that we have. So a guardrail is some kind of like password policy that you're putting in place around your LLM inputs and outputs, and especially the inputs. But the space of generation of an LLM is very vast. Like you're talking about billions or trillions of potential things that you could say, and there is no alignment and no guardrail which will cover all of it. So the attacker, we typically start with something, and then we apply different techniques to modify it. And if you give me the possibility to keep trying without stopping me, that's where I know that I'm going to succeed. In the same way that I don't care about how good the password policy is at BlackRock. I know that if I can try a very large amount of passwords, I am going to find your password because you're not going to stop me. So for me, jailbreaking is the same.
So the 5 password failure lockout, right? You fail 5 passwords, so you lock out the account, or you block the IP from which you're doing your brute force.
And I think that that's exactly the same that people need to do with guardrails for LLMs. So people say, we want to implement this guardrail or these other guardrails, which is better. So it's the same, for me sometimes it's the same as if people are telling me, well, we have a password policy with 12 characters versus 15 characters. Okay, 15 characters is better than 12. But if you're not doing account lockouts. If you're not stopping somebody from trying, it's just going to take them more time, but they're still going to find the password. So it's not that you say, well, I mean, we go from like 12 characters to, or from 8 characters to 12 characters, so we're not going to do account lockouts anymore because now our password policy is so strong. For me, that's the same with guardrails. Some guardrails are better than others, but if you give me the time, I'm going to break them. So I think we should apply the same idea that we do with password lockouts, with account lockouts. If a user is triggering a guardrail 5 times within a minute, then you're going to block that account because either your guardrail is not functioning correctly, and so you want to look into that, or if it's functioning correctly, definitely that user was trying to do something they shouldn't do. And to me, that's probably the best advice. Then obviously, a better guardrail is going to reduce the attack surface. Again, that's my thinking on guardrails.
Thank you. So I think we've got about 7 more minutes, and what I'd like to ask the both of you, perhaps starting with Praveen and then you, Donato, is what advice would you offer to organizations that are just starting or beginning to explore their integration of Gen AI technologies?
I think there are 2 broad things, especially you're responsible. You have a responsibility in running your AI security program, or that's just starting up, right? On the type of use cases that your organization is trying to build, and then there is the type of risk that comes with it. And I'll come out on the first one, right? Are you building your own foundational models? Then you have a set of risk. Are you, as a company, you're trying to leverage existing foundation models, and then you're using as-is, or you're fine-tuning them? Let's say, for example, with Azure OpenAI or any of the OpenAI APIs, and you're building things on top of it. Both presents a different set of risks. It's important to understand what your organization is trying to accomplish, and then the risk that comes with each of them is completely different. It's important to understand the business objectives there, and then I think that's probably the place where I would say I would recommend starting off, rather than just saying jump into OS top 10 file and that's not very. I think that's definitely a good structure. It gives you definitely a good structure, but I don't think that's a place to start.
I mean, maybe following on that, I think I would say education. One of the biggest problems we have when we start working with a new organization that's doing LLMs, it's you try to understand what those use cases are. And what's the first thing that you hear on the scoping call? We trained a model on our data, which obviously triggers a lot of things in your mind. Okay, this is very serious. I mean, where have you trained the model? Where is the data set? Like, are you exposing, this model could start regurgitating data. And then you realize that no training has ever happened. You realize that they're using Azure OpenAI or AWS Bedrock, and maybe it's just retrieval augmented generation. But I think it's really important, even just to start talking about the risk for organizations to, get people to use the correct terminology so we know what we're testing and we know what the risks are, because they're very, very different. So that's probably my first thing to say. And the second one is, now if you take a special case of an organization like BlackRock, who's obviously been doing this now for over 1 year, almost nobody builds guardrails into their LLM use cases. So people just build it and they put it out there, and I want to say easily 60% of what we test doesn't even have a guardrail, which is the equivalent of you not having a password policy. I mean, we are in cybersecurity. We all remember some websites from 20 years ago that didn't even have a password. I mean, we complain about, 8 characters is not enough, but at least that's a password policy, right? But everybody here that did pen testing 15 years ago, that you could find a website that didn't even have that. I mean, you could put 2 characters in, and that would be an acceptable password. I think a lot of LLM applications today, at least when they're being developed, nobody even thinks of where we're going to put the guardrails. Final one. Oh, sorry, I see one.
Yeah, I do just have one more comment. I think when it comes to Gen AI, you may also want to give some considerations that there might be other stakeholders when it comes to evaluation of risk. That could be your privacy, legal. There are aspects to which they care about, and they bring in a set of expertise and lens that you may, as a pure security practitioner, you may not necessarily have. I'll give an example, right? For example, when it comes to copyright and code, it's a pretty gray area, right? If you generate code, let's say you use GitHub Copilot to generate, you're using it as GitHub Copilot or Cursor to in your organization for developers to write code. Who has ownership of the code? Is it you, or is it Microsoft or Cursor who provides the product, or nobody, right? And that's a place where that's like an example, and that's a place where like your legal teams would probably be a better guide. There are, like I said, you should think about other stakeholders, privacy, legal, as part of this your evaluation process.
Because you have also I'm Italian, I know about the European Union and all of the regulations. There is obviously the EU AI Act, which affects everyone because most organizations have customers in Europe. And I think, the cybersecurity part, everybody understands, but the part about, for example, what's the regulation on how you are going to use a model, on what data can you use it, what can you do with the data, or even just as you were saying, legal. So if you have a chatbot and I go to it and I get it to give me financial advice, that's not a use case, but I get your chatbot to give me financial advice. What are you covered legally? Because you tell me I shouldn't trust it. I mean, what happens? And I think the cybersecurity only goes a certain way, up to a certain point, but then somebody else has to define, knowing that jailbreaking will likely be possible with some very complex jailbreaks, where does it stop? Where does your liability stop? How can you demonstrate, well, listen, we've done state of the art, like, if there is a new jailbreak that we can stop, like, obviously it's not our fault, but I don't think that's very well defined. I don't think nobody knows, or there has been any court case where somebody has drawn the line and said, okay, well, you've done enough. So even if some unexpected answers came out, you're okay from a legal point of view. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think anybody really knows what that looks like.
No, and I pity the court that takes on the first AI case. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I'm sorry we're running out of time. I think we could probably listen to the both of you talk about generative AI and security for another hour easily, but we do have some other things to attend to, including dinner. Thank you very much, both of you, for your time and your expertise on this panel. Again, it's been very interesting. Thank you again.
Thank you.